everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Madeline and I create crafting content here on YouTube. In today's video, I have a tutorial showing you how to read knitting cable charts when you're working flat knitting. So previously I've done a video of how to read knitting charts when you're working in the round, and that was paired with a hat tutorial. So again, this video is going to be paired with a larger project, but this video is just for the knitting cable chart portion. So this is just a general overview of how to read those knitting cable charts when you're working flat knitting. If you're interested in the larger project, keep an eye out for that video coming soon. We're going to be working through this gorgeous cable shawl that I love so much right here. And I'm very excited for the full tutorial. So keep an eye out for that one if you're curious in that. So let's get started. So here I have chart A, and this is just the bottom portion here because I'm zoomed in a bit. But the first thing you want to note whenever you look at a knitting chart is, are you knitting flat or are you knitting in the round? So I do have a separate video showing how to read a chart when you're knitting in the round. For this though, we're knitting flat. So the key when you're knitting flat is first, you're going to read from the bottom to the top. So that's the same as in the round. But the tricky thing here is you're going to read the lines in different directions depending on whether you're on the right side or the front side of your work or the back side, also known as the wrong side of your work. So down here at the bottom, you can see I've put in 2 little arrows. So we just cast on 11 stitches. So in our cast on row, we were essentially working from right to left. And now the first row we're going to work on the chart is going to be a wrong side row. So we're going to be working across the back of our knitting. So because we're working across the back of our knitting, we're going to be working in the opposite direction. So we're going to read this chart from left over towards right. So that's why I put this little wrong side arrow going that way. Then when we turn our work again to begin working the second row, we're going to be back on the front side of our work, also known as the right side. So in that case, we're going to be working from right to left again. So you can see I've put the arrow there. So when we alternate between the rows, we're going to alternate the directions we're working. So row 1, we're going to read from left to right. Then row 2, we're going to read from right to left. Row 3, we read from left to right. And we're going to continue alternating exactly like that. Now, different flat knitting charts will indicate these arrows differently at the bottom. So sometimes you'll see they start off with the right side row and then move to the wrong side row. So you just want to make sure that you're paying attention to whether it is the right side or the wrong side of your work, and that you're following along with the arrows that are designated in the chart that you're working with. So the next thing that's important to recognize when you're looking at a flat knitting chart is the colors of the squares. So this can be incredibly tricky on flat knitting charts. The reason it's tricky is because the colors that are on these charts represent what you would see when you're looking at just the front of your work. So the gray in here, those ones would all be purl bumps. All the gray all over the chart, those are purl bumps. So when you're looking at the front of your work, you want that all to appear as a purl bump. The white stitches are all knit stitches. So when you're looking at the front of your work or the right side of your work, you want all those to appear as knit stitches. So why is this tricky? This is tricky because when you're working across the back of your work, if you want the front side of your work to appear as a purl bump, you actually need to knit that stitch. So these gray stitches and the white stitches are going to be different depending on whether or not you're working across the right side or the wrong side of your work. So here's a little sample that I've knit of just this beginning part of the chart. So the clearest way to show it is in this larger gray portion here. Right, so when I'm working across a row and I get to working across the right side, so this is the top side, it's facing me. When I'm working across this row and over here I want one of these to be a purl bump, all I'd simply have to do is purl that stitch. Now when I turn my work and I'm working in the opposite direction across one of these rows, and I want, again, on the front side of my work, that stitch to appear as a purl bump, how do I do that? I would actually want to knit that stitch when I'm on the wrong side of my work so that on the right side of my work, it appears as a purl bump. The same thing applies for the knit stitches. So when I'm working across the right side of my work, so I know this is the right side because I can see all my pretty cables. I'm working across the right side of my work. There, I'd want to knit those stitches because I want them to appear as knit stitches. Now when I turn my work and I'm working in the opposite direction across that row, and I get over here to where my cables are, I know on the front I want it to appear as a knit stitch. So when I'm on this side of my work, I need to purl those stitches. So that's why it can be incredibly tricky with the different colors on a flat knitting chart. So again, this is all written out on the legend portion, but when you're working across a right side row and you see a white square, that's a knit stitch. If you see a gray square, that's a purl stitch. When you're working across a wrong side row, if you see a gray square, that's a knit stitch. And if you see a white square, that's a purl stitch. So it can be tricky at first, but then as we learn to move along and continue reading our knitting, it becomes easier and easier. So those two tricks of first reading back and forth across your knitting, depending on whether or not you're on a right side or a wrong side row, and also knowing that the colors that are shown on this chart represent what you want to see on the front side of your work, are the two biggest keys to reading a knitting chart for flat knitting. And although it's a little surprising, I feel like usually we think of knitting in the round as being trickier. I actually think flat knitting charts are more difficult than knitting in the round knitting charts. So just something to keep in mind. Now the next thing I want to go through is how to read the different cable symbols that occur on our knitting chart. So the first thing I just want to point out is that all the cables are going to appear on right side or the front side of our work. So it's always going to appear on these even rows. So when I'm looking at a cable symbol, the first thing I note is that they take up more than one box. So each one of these boxes represents one stitch. So the first thing I do when I see a cable stitch is I count how many boxes it takes up. So let's say we're looking at this cable stitch in row 2. This stitch takes up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stitches. So this cable stitch is going to involve 6 stitches total. The next thing I figure out is how many stitches do I need to hold on a cable needle, and do I need to hold that cable needle in the front or the back of my work? So to identify this, I look at the lower right-hand corner. So in this lower right-hand corner, you can see a parallelogram forming, right? So you see this line, and then it goes behind this parallelogram that's going in the other direction. So what that tells me is that these initial stitches are going to go behind stitches. So that tells me I need to hold this cable needle in the back of my work. Next, I need to figure out how many stitches to hold in the back of my work. So this initial kind of like bottom right hand corner, this parallelogram takes up 1, 2, 3 stitches. So in this case, I take 3 stitches, put them on a cable needle and hold them in the back of my work because this line is going behind this larger white box. Then I would knit 1, 2, 3 stitches from my left hand needle, and then I would go back and knit those 3 stitches being held on my cable needle. Now you'll notice there that I said to knit all those stitches. So I knitted the stitches that were being held on the cable needle, and I knitted the stitches that were just being knit regularly from my left hand needle. So how did I know how to do that? I knew how to do that by the color of my cable stitch. So this one again is worked on a right side row. So when we have a white stitch on a right side row, that means that we knit it. So you could see something in comparison, like let's say we were looking at this stitch right up here. Try and make it a little bolder so you know which one I'm looking at. Now instead, let's say we were looking at this stitch. You can see the background of this stitch is gray. So in that case, we'd be purling that stitch there. So let's try, as we just broke down this cable stitch of take the first 3 stitches, hold them in the back of our work because this line is going behind this kind of like parallelogram going in the front of our work. So we held 3 stitches on a cable needle behind our work. We then knit the next 3 stitches from our left hand needle, and then we knitted those 3 stitches from the cable needle. Let's try breaking down this cable stitch. So again, if I look at the bottom right hand corner, here you can see this parallelogram is going in front of this diagonal line in the back. So what does that tell us here? So here, that tells us that we're going to take however many stitches this box takes up. So this takes up 1, 2, 3 stitches. We're going to take 3 stitches. We're going to hold them on a cable needle in front of our work. Then behind our work, or on the other knitting needle really, we just have one stitch going behind those stitches. So we're gonna purl one stitch because this is a gray background. Then we're gonna knit those 3 stitches from our cable needle. So there's a couple things that I just went through that I just wanna really reinforce. So first, the way you figure out how many stitches and whether or not to hold the cable needle in the front or the back of your work is by looking at that bottom right-hand corner. So the bottom right-hand corner tells us how many stitches to put on our cable needle, and then it tells us whether to go in the front of our work or the back of our work. Then if we look at the bottom left-hand corner, that tells us how many stitches to work from our left-hand needle. So in the case over here, we had 3 stitches going in front, starting over here at the left side. So we knit 3 stitches from our left-hand needle. In this case over here, we had 1 stitch starting over here in the bottom left corner, or 1 box. So in that case, we just purled, because it's a gray background, that 1 stitch from that left-hand needle. So those are the 2 things that are really important when working cable stitches. And that really allows you to read your cable chart rather than looking up each stitch as you work along. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to leave them down below. And if you're new to my channel, don't forget to hit that red subscribe button. That way you'll be sure to be updated when I release the full pattern that goes along with this video. I'll see you next time.